Attorney Olivia Taylor was among the first to be introduced to Douglas Chappell. She met him through the director of G. Konecki's administrative offices. At the first glimpse of the tall, striking executive, Olivia felt a strong personal attraction. It took all her professional composure to keep it hidden. After all, she was expected to work with him, and Olivia wasn't the type to swoon over a man or openly flirt. Douglas Chappell had recently taken over as the head of the real estate tax division at GESKC. Meanwhile, Olivia was a senior associate attorney in the corporate counsel's office. The real property division was a separate but related office at GESKC. Doug was not Olivia's superior, nor was he officially higher than her in the corporate hierarchy. However, he was a rising star with a clear path to significant advancement. He was also exceptionally good-looking and possessed that rare, magnetic charm known as charisma. His arrival caused a stir among the women at GESKC, from those in the production plants to the ones in the executive suites. The legal department, predominantly staffed by women in both clerical and professional roles, was especially affected. Although Olivia initially paid little attention to the whispers and gossips circulating among her female colleagues, it didn't mean she was entirely unaffected. She simply refused to allow herself to entertain such thoughts. As rumors about Doug's romantic prowess and remarkable physical attributes grew, her curiosity began to stir. Despite this, Olivia watched her female peers and even her secretary, Julie Stevenson, blatantly flirt with Doug Chappell. Olivia, however, refrained from indulging in such behavior. She was an attorney and, moreover, a married woman. Olivia had reached a point in her career where she and her husband David had purchased a charming colonial-style home in Del Mar, conveniently located near an elementary school. The home was a prelude to starting a family, a topic she and David had been discussing. True to her nature, Olivia had saved diligently in preparation for children, approaching this next phase of life with her usual methodical planning. Some might have thought her marriage to David, which took place at the end of college and before law school, was rushed. However, it had been part of a carefully thought-out plan. David began teaching middle school science while Olivia attended law school. He put aside his dream of becoming a marine biologist, a vision of living on a boat in a warmer climate. This romantic ambition was a hallmark of David's personality, and one of the reasons Olivia found him so endearing. As their married life unfolded, David discovered a passion for teaching and, in the past 2 years, had been attending graduate school during evenings and summers. With their combined incomes, they were financially ready to start a family. David's dream of a marine biology career remained unfulfilled, metaphorically stranded on the shores of the Hudson River. Their rescue dog Buster was the only unexpected element in Olivia's unexpected life. Buster had entered their lives when David, during a school trip to an animal shelter, found a forlorn puppy that was too awkward-looking to attract adopters. Captivated by the pup's large, soulful eyes, David overlooked its ungainly appearance, a mix of Irish Wolfhound and St. Bernard, and brought the dog, now named Buster, home to Olivia. Initially, Olivia was unsure about the addition to their small household. However, she saw it as a small consolation for David's unfulfilled dream. Buster grew into a massive, unattractive dog that intimidated visitors at first glance, but his affectionate nature quickly won people over, his only danger being that he might lick someone excessively. Olivia grew to love the enormous beast almost as much as she adored her husband. Both David and Buster were large, quirky, and outwardly intimidating, but were loving and kind at heart. Olivia's life seemed perfect. A home, a dog, a happy marriage, and plans for children. That was until Doug Chappell began pursuing her. She was exactly the type of woman he found irresistible, a pretty girl blossoming into a stunning woman. She still carried the shyness and vulnerability of her youth, combined with the fresh innocence of a young bride. What made her even more appealing to him was her resistance. For a man accustomed to easy success with women, the ones who made him work for it were all the more enticing. One afternoon, Doug walked into Olivia's office. "We need to address these triplet leases in the town of Colony," he said. Moving around her desk, he stood so close he was almost touching her. One arm rested on the back of her chair, while the other gestured to the spreadsheet he had placed on her desk. GE's real property division had a long history of success in challenging property taxes. But the town of Colony was a formidable opponent. "What do you suggest?" Olivia asked, turning slightly in her chair to face him. The movement placed her nearly within the circle of his arms. She could feel the warmth of his body and the almost magnetic pull he seemed to exude. "I propose filing in rem proceedings on the property assessments, given that the leases assign us the rights of ownership," he replied. "All of them?" she inquired. Doug locked eyes with her and said, "Yes, every single one. I don't believe in leaving things unfinished." His tone suggested he wasn't only referring to the leases. The implication sent a shiver through her, an intoxicating mix of exhilaration and apprehension. "That's a massive undertaking," she replied. "You'll find their defense is incredibly strong." "I believe a powerful offense can always overpower a strong defense," he countered. The two began collaborating on the tax cases. Doug brought in independent appraisers and handled the initial tax protests, while Olivia prepared the in rem petitions. The term in rem, Latin for against the thing, referred to legal action focused on property rather than individuals. In this case, it was aimed at the property assessments. The town of Colony had consistently maintained its assessments at 150% of actual value, instead of adhering to the required fair value. Despite this, Olivia had a significant workload preparing the cases for trial. Doug insisted on closely supervising the work, which required frequent interactions with Olivia. He wasn't joking about launching a serious offensive, not just in the tax cases, but also against Olivia's resolve to reject his advances. She fought valiantly, even though deep down she longed to give in. From his very first move, her resistance wavered. Olivia was an ordinary woman with the same desires as anyone else, but complicating matters was her lack of experience. Olivia had only ever been with her husband, David. They were each other's firsts. According to her carefully laid plans, they were supposed to remain loyal to one another until death parted them. Yet, she couldn't stop herself from wondering what being with another man might be like. She didn't doubt for a second that Doug was exceptional in bed. Women in her own office claimed to know this firsthand, including her secretary Julie, who had carried on a 2-month affair with him. Julie even boasted about her experiences and only ended the fling when her husband grew suspicious. Unlike Julie's husband, David wasn't the type to get jealous, but his trust and unconditional love made it even harder for Olivia to consider betraying him. Olivia wasn't the kind of woman to cheat, and she would never act behind her husband's back. Still, Doug was incredibly difficult to resist, and a part of her didn't even want to try. David wasn't lacking in the bedroom, but he wasn't remarkable either. He was slightly taller than average, had unremarkable looks, and was modestly endowed. However, when judged by his character, David was a prince. He had been her real-life Prince Charming from the moment they first met as freshmen in biology class. They had connected instantly, on countless levels. Olivia truly loved him, but Doug had a magnetic quality that made him impossible to ignore. True to his word, Doug pursued Olivia relentlessly. He shamelessly flirted, complimenting everything from her hair and shoes to her dresses and even the smallest pieces of jewelry she wore. Deep down, Olivia knew that almost from the moment Doug had arrived at GE's offices, she had begun dressing differently. She stopped wearing pantsuits and instead opted for pinstriped jackets paired with skirts that grew tighter and shorter with each passing season. Her entire demeanor began to shift, from how she styled her hair to the perfume she chose, even down to the lace-topped stockings that replaced her usual pantyhose. Outwardly, Olivia clung to her image as a buttoned-up lawyer, but the sensual woman inside was yearning to break free, and Doug Chappell knew exactly how to unlace her carefully tied defenses. He suggested a working lunch off campus, where they could focus without interruptions. Soon after, he invited her for a post-work drink. "Just one," he'd say. "You've earned it." One drink inevitably led to a late return home. At first, David and their dog Buster were waiting for her. But as summer transitioned to fall, David began spending more time on his boat. David had purchased a small sunfish sailboat during his first summer of teaching and learned to sail on Lake George. Eventually, he started working summers at the Albany Yacht Club, earning barely above minimum wage. Olivia saw it as his way of holding on to a piece of his old dreams. The extra income also contributed to their baby fund, so Olivia couldn't complain about his absence when she was often late herself. However, Buster was always there to greet her. His expressive eyes seemed to hold a mix of curiosity and perhaps quiet accusation. If the dog understood her internal struggle and how close she was to crossing the line, he couldn't say. If David suspected anything, he was choosing to ignore it. As the long New York winter approached, a fierce October ice storm blanketed the region. That day, David wasn't having the best time. It wasn't that he disliked teaching. In fact, he found it rewarding in many ways. However, the profession was far more challenging than people realized. Teachers had to contend with the bureaucracy of school administrators, the petty grievances of colleagues, and the wide-ranging attitudes of parents, some overly involved, others completely disengaged. Rarely was there a middle ground. David taught 3 ninth-grade general science classes, each with about 26 students. Year after year, his 78 students shuffled through his classroom, mostly uninterested in the physical world and more focused on social dynamics, celebrities, and their appearance. Science, at least, had the potential to capture their attention. A small explosion at the start of class was usually enough to pique their interest. But keeping that attention was another matter entirely. David considered it his most significant challenge, finding ways to impart the laws of the universe to the future leaders and innovators of society. He understood how dangerous scientific ignorance could be and felt a deep sense of responsibility, complicated by the demands of administrators, parents, politicians, and a society that saw his job as simply preparing students for standardized tests. Although he embraced the challenges of his career, David couldn't ignore the growing dread of being confined to a classroom for the rest of his life. He yearned for the dreams he had given up. On days when the weather permitted, he found solace sailing his small boat on the cold waters of the Hudson. Unfortunately, the weather that October day was anything but cooperative. Freezing rain coated roads, trees, and power lines in sheets of ice. By midday, schools and most businesses had closed. Knowing that Olivia's Audi wouldn't fare well in such conditions, David decided to pick her up in his old diesel Ford pickup. Her car could stay in the company lot overnight, and he would drive her safely home and back the next day. David arrived at the GE campus mid-afternoon, expecting he'd have to convince Olivia to leave early. Most of the parking lot was already empty, so he was surprised to see Olivia walking out of the building. What shocked him more was that she wasn't alone. A tall man walked beside her, holding an umbrella in one hand, while his other arm rested firmly around her waist. The way they moved together spoke of intimacy, something far beyond the casual camaraderie of coworkers sharing an umbrella. There are moments when a teacher watches a struggling student suddenly grasp a concept. One minute, they're floundering in confusion, and the next, everything clicks into place. Sometimes it's because of something the teacher demonstrated or explained, but more often it's simply a moment when all the threads come together and understanding dawns. That day, David experienced a moment of clarity like that, but he wasn't the teacher. As Olivia made her way across the slick pavement, She leaned closely against the unfamiliar man she was with, resting her head on his chest and wrapping her arm firmly around him. While it might have seemed like a reasonable act to steady herself on the ice, her movements carried a level of comfort and ease that went beyond mere caution. There was no awkwardness or hesitation, just a married woman clinging to someone who wasn't her husband. In that moment, David understood the significance of all the subtle signals he had noticed, but failed to interpret until now. The way Olivia had begun dressing differently for work, her distracted demeanor at home for months, and her consistently late arrivals, they all pointed to what should have been obvious, though David's love for her had made him blind. His initial instinct was to drive off, but that wasn't who he was. Instead, he turned his truck and gently pressed the gas, positioning his vehicle between the pair under the umbrella and the parking lot exit. Both Olivia and Doug glanced up as the truck came to a stop, blocking their path. Doug's expression suggested he was on the verge of cursing David out, but before he could, David rolled down his window and leaned out. "Thought my wife might need a ride home," he said. David could see Doug swallow whatever expletive he was about to utter. Olivia, meanwhile, stood frozen, her mouth agape. David, still leaning into the freezing rain, locked eyes with his wife and said, "Get in," his voice carrying a sharp, menacing edge. Without a word, Olivia untangled herself from Doug and hurried around the truck to climb into the passenger seat. As she did, David gave Doug a hard, unrelenting stare. Doug attempted a nervous smile but failed to meet David's gaze. Once Olivia was seated, David gave a small nod in Doug's direction before putting the truck into drive. The drive to their home in Del Mar typically took about 30 minutes, but the icy conditions stretched it to over an hour. For David and Olivia, the silence in the truck's cab made it feel even longer. They didn't speak until they reached the bypass in Bethlehem, just a few minutes from home. Finally, David broke the tense quiet, prodding, "Were you ever planning to tell me about him?" His voice was low, barely audible. Olivia, staring out the passenger window, didn't turn to face him. She considered denying everything, but realized there was nothing to deny. "No, because there's nothing to tell," she said after a pause. "Doug is a coworker. I like him, and he likes me." "Do you get that close to all your coworkers?" David asked. "Of course not," Olivia replied, hesitating before continuing. "Doug is, special to me. We're close in a way that goes beyond just friendship." As David guided the truck up Delaware Avenue toward their small, 3-bedroomed colonial home, he processed her words. "How far has this friendship gone with Mr. Umbrella?" he asked. "His name is Doug. Doug Chappell," Olivia said. "He works in the real property office." "So he's just a coworker then?" David asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm, making it clear he didn't believe her. By the time they pulled into the driveway, Olivia had chosen not to respond to his accusation. She quickly stepped out of the truck and hurried into the house. David parked in the garage and entered through the kitchen door, where Buster was waiting for his evening walk. Despite the miserable weather, the man and his dog headed out. The icy rain didn't faze Buster, a dog seemingly built for harsh conditions. When they returned home, both were soaked through. They descended to the basement, where David tossed his wet clothes into the washer and pulled fresh ones from the dryer. Buster shook himself off, but David helped dry him with an old beach towel kept there for that purpose. When they climbed back upstairs to the kitchen, Olivia was waiting, seated at the table in her terry cloth robe with an open bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "We need to talk," she said, pouring the wine. David took a seat, but chose the head of the table rather than sitting across from her. This allowed him to angle himself away, ensuring Olivia couldn't look directly into his eyes. Her tone was gentle, yet resolute. I want you to know that I love you and am happy in our marriage, she began. But while nothing romantic has happened with Doug, I can't deny we have a strong attraction to each other. What exactly is that supposed to mean? David asked, his voice rising slightly. His anger wasn't just jealousy. It was fueled by a deep sense of betrayal. Olivia was his first and only love. Their relationship had given him a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. Olivia continued, carefully choosing her words, a habit honed by her career as a lawyer. It means that we have a solid marriage, and I'm fully committed to it. I love you, but I can't control every desire. I'm human. We can't help who we're drawn to. I've never been with anyone but you. The fact that I'm tempted by Doug is undeniable. And? David prompted, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. Olivia hesitated, sighing deeply. This isn't easy. I've thought about it a lot, and I need to get Doug Chappell out of my system. Working with him every day and not knowing what it would be like is unbearable. What would be like? David pressed. You're the only man I've ever been with, Olivia said. He's supposed to be amazing. I can't help wondering, and he's made it clear he wants me, but I haven't even kissed him, and I won't. Unless, well, she let the word hang in the air. David had already turned away. When she finished speaking, he stood and said, Buster needs to be fed. Olivia let the conversation drop, torn between her love for her husband and the desires she couldn't suppress. 3 weeks had passed since the ice storm, and the weather had turned unusually warm for November. Each year seemed to bring more unpredictable conditions. While a late-season hurricane churned in the Caribbean, the emotional climate between Olivia and David remained frozen. They had spoken little since the strained conversation at the kitchen table. When Olivia returned to work, Doug immediately inquired about what had happened. Was he violent? Doug asked. No, Olivia replied. He was shocked. I think he's hurt, not angry, Olivia said. He's not the violent type. Well, it seemed to me like he had murder in his eyes, Doug replied. No, he's just hurt. I could hear it, Olivia said as she walked away. Doug wasn't known for his courage, and David's calm demeanor belied his inner strength. This was unlike Julie Stevenson's husband, Louis, whose small frame hid a fiery temper. Thanksgiving came and went, and Christmas soon arrived, along with the office holiday party. It was a modest gathering, limited to their building and devoid of alcohol, though everyone still managed to make an appearance, even briefly. By December, Doug had already seduced most of the attractive women at GECC, none of whom had complained. The only exception was Olivia, who had yet to succumb to his advances. The game wasn't over, though. Since the unfortunate and unexpected appearance of her husband that icy October day, Olivia had kept her distance. But as time passed, Doug saw an opportunity to reignite their connection. He caught Olivia just outside her office as the party wound down. Before she realized it, they were alone in her office with the door closed, kissing passionately. I can't do this, she said, pulling back. No, not. You said your husband wouldn't cause any problems, Doug countered. It's still cheating. I owe David more than that, she said. And what about what you owe yourself? Doug asked. You know what you want. Don't deny it. He pulled her close and kissed her again. Despite her internal struggle, Olivia found herself responding, pouring her pent-up passion into the kiss. It took every ounce of her willpower to break away. I'm sorry, she sobbed. Doug, clearly frustrated, said, We're running out of time. What do you mean? She asked. I'm being promoted to the New York City headquarters. I'll be leaving at the end of January. They haven't announced that yet, she replied. It won't be official until the start of the year, but they've already told me to prepare for the move," he explained. With that, he kissed her again, but Olivia continued to resist. On her drive home, Olivia reflected on her situation. She wanted Doug, but only temporarily. His departure felt like a blessing, yet it also felt like she was about to miss an opportunity that would never come again. She loved David and wanted to build a life and family with him. But suddenly, the idea of motherhood felt like a trap closing in on her before she had truly lived. Doug's question lingered in her mind. What did she owe herself? Didn't she deserve to experience life before settling down? By the time she pulled into the driveway, Olivia had convinced herself that she needed to be with Doug at least once before he left for New York, but she wasn't going to sneak around. She decided she would talk to David and explain her desire for this one experience. Doug's imminent departure, she reasoned, made it easier. It would be a one-time thing, and then he'd be gone. She and David could return to their comfortable life, but she would have satisfied her curiosity. Olivia resolved to approach the topic carefully. She didn't want it to come across as a fait accompli, but rather as the beginning of a discussion where they could find common ground. In truth, however, Olivia was accustomed to getting her way. In their marriage, she was the dominant partner, and David had always acquiesced to her decisions without much friction. But this time, her desire was poised to ignite a long, simmering conflict. She decided the best time to broach the subject was after dinner, just before they headed to bed. Olivia chose the Sunday evening following the office holiday party. She made David's favorite pot roast for dinner and took extra care with her appearance afterward. While David relaxed on the couch, streaming a nature documentary, Olivia joined him around 9. Sliding in next to him, she let the faint scent of her Chanel perfume precede her. Before he could speak, she kissed him softly and said, "We need to talk about the problem between us." "Problem?" David asked, puzzled. "My attraction to Doug Chappell," she said plainly. "This Doug would be Mr. Umbrella?" he asked. "Yes, the man from the parking lot," she confirmed. "I'm attracted to him," she admitted. "And what exactly does that mean?" David asked, his tone sharpening. "Wants me?" Olivia said, pausing, "and I want him." She felt David's body stiffen beside her, and when he pulled away, she moved closer, resting her head on his chest and taking his hands in hers. "This doesn't change how I feel about you," she insisted. "I'll always want you, but right now, I want him, just physically." David wasn't buying it. He gently pushed her back, keeping her at arm's length. Looking her in the eyes, he asked, "What are you trying to tell me? Have you slept with him? Because this isn't something a wife says to her husband unless she's confessing." Smiling softly, Olivia replied, "I would never sleep with him without telling you first." "So you're telling me now?" David pressed. "I'm telling you that I want this one fling before we have kids," she explained. "We've saved enough to start a family, but we've been waiting. I've been waiting. And now I know why." "And why is that?" he asked. "I've never been with anyone else. I don't know what it's like to be with another man. I was too focused when I was younger, too controlled. I never experienced life. I didn't enjoy college or law school because I was always studying. I just want this one fling before we settle into what I know will be a great life, marriage, and family. Just one brief experience." "You want to have an affair with Mr. Umbrella?" David nearly shouted. "No," Olivia shot back, "just a brief encounter. He's getting a promotion and moving to the New York City office. He'll be gone after the new year. I only want a weekend with him, nothing more." "And what if I say no?" David asked, though he already knew her response. "I was hoping you'd understand that I need this experience," she said. Without giving him a chance to respond, she kissed him and pressed herself against his side. Their lovemaking that night carried a bittersweet undertone. Something essential between them had shifted. David had only ever been with Olivia, and until moments ago, he had expected that she would always be the only woman he knew so intimately. Convinced the matter was settled, Olivia informed Doug that her first weekend in January was his. Doug's house was tucked away on a quiet cul-de-sac in Niskayuna. For the area, it was a modest home, a 3-bedroom split-level in a neighborhood of 5-bedroom colonial-style houses. As agreed, his attached garage was open, ready for her arrival. Olivia parked her Audi next to Doug's Porsche and stepped inside. Doug was waiting in the living room with an open bottle of wine. As Olivia descended from the garage entry to the main floor, Doug, standing below her, caught the full effect of her short black dress. The dress hugged her body, highlighting her curves, the fullness of her chest, and the enticing shape of her hips. The look in his eyes combined lust and anticipation, a stark contrast to the sadness in David's gaze when she left him only 20 minutes earlier. David's eyes had been filled with pain, a pain she wished she could erase. But she had reassured him this was a one-time experience. Afterward, she would be his forever. They would have children, and their love would prove strong enough to endure this temporary lapse. She had told herself this because she truly believed it. To Olivia, this weekend was simply an adventure, something to solidify her love for David and strengthen their marriage. Her entire body buzzed with anticipation as she approached Doug. From the tips of her fingers to the soles of her feet, she felt alive with excitement. Drawn together by an invisible force, their bodies met in a passionate embrace in the middle of his living room. Doug kissed her deeply while wrapping his arms around her, then pulled back and said, "One glass of wine, and then we need to head out for dinner. I've got tickets for the band's visit at Proctor's Theater." Doug knew how to savor the moment, taking his time to woo her, showing her a night of romance and sophistication. He relished his victory, telling himself that he gave just as much as he took. "I'm completely in your hands this weekend," Olivia assured him. They dined at a cozy Italian restaurant in downtown Schenectady before enjoying the show at the newly renovated Vaudeville Theater. They drank sparingly, but when they returned to Doug's house, he opened a bottle of champagne. They toasted to their weekend together before heading to the bedroom to finally act on the attraction that had drawn them together. Doug undressed Olivia as though unveiling a priceless masterpiece, complimenting her beauty with every move. For the first time, Olivia felt truly admired in a way she had never experienced before. Doug's hands roamed her body, igniting her desire to an almost unbearable level. She pushed his shirt off, revealing a chest covered in dark blonde hair, a stark contrast to David's nearly bare chest. For a brief moment, she thought of her husband, but quickly pushed him from her mind. This moment belonged to her and Doug. Later, she could think about David. When Doug climaxed, the memory of precautions crossed Olivia's mind. She was still on birth control, but she wasn't sure whether she felt relief or disappointment about that. It had been the most exhilarating intimacy of her life, but the weekend wasn't over. They had 2 more blissful days ahead. Sunday came too quickly. Most of the weekend had been spent in bed, exploring every possible way to satisfy their mutual desire. The experience had been thrilling, but by Sunday afternoon, Olivia was ready to return home and reconcile with David. They ordered Chinese takeout and shared one final round of intimacy before Olivia showered, packed her things, and slipped back into the same short black dress she had worn Friday night. She left the same way she had entered, through the garage and into her car, hidden from prying eyes. To anyone watching, the most she could be accused of was being out with Doug on Friday night. Soon, Doug would move on to his promotion in New York, and Olivia would focus on starting a family with David. She felt content with her life as she drove home. 20 minutes later, Olivia pulled into her driveway. The house was unusually dark. The porch lights were off, and David's truck wasn't in sight. She assumed he had parked in the garage. Opening the side door, she looked for Buster, expecting the dog to greet her excitedly. But he wasn't there. "I'm home," she called out. Olivia waited for Buster to come running, but the house remained silent. Puzzled, she checked the kitchen and living room, both of which were empty. She called out again, "David, I'm home." Still there was no response, only silence. They must have gone for a late walk, she told herself. David often took Buster out when he was feeling down. She walked to the refrigerator for ice and poured herself a glass of scotch. Checking the bottle, she saw that it was nearly full, suggesting David hadn't been drinking. She settled onto the living room sofa, pulling her legs up and resting in a comfortable corner. Though exhausted, she resolved to wait for David to return, so she could show him that nothing had changed, except perhaps that her love for him had grown even stronger. He would be treated like the prince she believed he was, but despite her intentions, Olivia dozed off. The ringing of the front doorbell startled her awake. The sound was jarring, amplified by the front hall's proximity to the living room. She realized daylight was pouring through the windows. She had slept through the night. As she approached the door, a sense of unease settled over her. Where was Buster? He should have been by the door, eager to greet whoever was outside. Opening the door, Olivia found a tall woman with her hair pulled back tightly, dressed in an inexpensive dark pantsuit. "Olivia Taylor?" the woman asked. "Yes, can I help you?" Olivia replied. "Mrs. David Taylor?" the woman clarified. "Yes," Olivia said, her voice uncertain. "What is this about?" "I'm Detective Sylvia Marks," the woman stated, holding up a gold badge. "May I come in? I have some questions to ask you." Olivia instinctively stepped back to let the detective enter. But then a terrible thought struck her. "Oh no!" Olivia exclaimed. "Has something happened to David?" Detective Marks moved into the living room, turned around, and gave Olivia a deliberate head-to-ease, once-over. Olivia suddenly became aware that she was still wearing the same short black dress she had worn to dinner with Doug the previous evening. Realizing how inappropriate her attire was for early morning, she felt embarrassed and self-conscious. "Not that I'm aware of," the detective finally replied. "I'm here about Douglas Chappell." "Doug? You mean Mr. Chappell? What about him?" Olivia asked, feeling both vulnerable and confused, which seemed to be exactly what the detective intended. "Was assaulted last night while taking his trash out in front of his house," the detective began, pulling a small notepad from her pocket. "He claims a man in a ski mask attacked him with a small club." "Oh my God, are you here because you think David did it?" Olivia blurted out. "Actually, no," Detective Marks responded, a faint smile forming on her lips, as though she couldn't help herself. "David Taylor has been ruled out as a suspect, though, I'll admit, under the circumstances, he was our first thought, especially since Mr. Chappell wasted no time telling us he spent the weekend with you." The detective's smile turned into a smirk. Olivia felt a wave of nausea and sank onto the couch, collapsing more than sitting. Detective Marks followed, perching on the edge of a wingback chair across from her. "You said my husband isn't a suspect?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. "No," Marks replied. "The manager and staff at the Albany Yacht Club confirm he launched his sailboat, Amour, yesterday afternoon and headed south. Given the season, they decided to monitor him via his VHF radio. They can place him on the Hudson River near Poughkeepsie at the time of the attack." "A boat?" Olivia repeated, regaining some of her professional composure. "He took his little sailboat out on the river in January?" she asked incredulously. The detective flipped through her notebook. "It's a 38-foot Catalina, according to the yacht club manager. Apparently he bought it in December and has been preparing it for weeks. They think he's lucky the river is mostly ice-free this winter. They believe he's heading south." Without another word, Olivia bolted upstairs. In the master bedroom, everything seemed in place at first glance, but as she looked closer, she noticed certain things were missing. His closet still held most of his work clothes, but his dresser drawers were nearly empty. It was on her own dresser that she found his note, a greeting card sealed in an envelope. The card's cover read, "How can I tell you how sorry I am?" Inside, there was a pre-printed poem, but Olivia barely glanced at it, her eyes locked on the handwritten note. Dear Olivia, I've taken a job with a small marine research institute in Florida. It's an entry-level role, but it's a start. I'm sorry to leave like this, but I couldn't stay in this marriage any longer. You were right when you said we should experience life before settling down. I'll miss you, but I don't think I love you anymore. I've used the baby fund to buy a boat so I can sail south and live aboard when I get to Florida. Do whatever you want with the house and the divorce. I hope you're not too upset and that things work out with Mr. Umbrella. Goodbye, David. Olivia let out an anguished cry, loud enough for Detective Marks to hear. Moments later, the detective appeared in the bedroom and found Olivia crumpled on the floor. She helped Olivia to the bed and offered her a drink. Sylvia Marks wasn't particularly fond of lawyers, and having lost her own husband to infidelity, she felt little sympathy for anyone stepping out on their spouse. Yet, at that moment, she empathized with Olivia. Not as a lawyer, but as a woman who had been left behind. Let me make you some tea, Sylvia offered. No, I'll be fine, Olivia replied weakly. Let's go back to the living room and I'll answer your questions. As they returned downstairs, Detective Marks asked, Did you see Louis Stevenson at any point this weekend while you were with Mr. Chappell? My secretary Julie's husband? Olivia asked. No, I've never met him. I wouldn't even know what he looks like. The detective handed Olivia a photo, clearly a mugshot of a rough-looking man. Olivia shivered as she studied it. I'm sorry, I have never seen him before. Well, it was just a possibility, Mark said. Mr. Chappell couldn't identify his attacker, but I thought if Stevenson had been following you two this weekend, you might have noticed him. I didn't see anyone following us, Olivia replied. Do you think he attacked Doug? That is a likely suspect, Mark said in a professional tone. He has a history of jealousy and a record for assault. Once we ruled out your husband, Stevenson became the obvious choice. He has an alibi, though, provided by some friends. I was hoping you could place him at the scene to break that alibi. I'm sorry, I can't help, Olivia said. Will Doug be okay? Was badly beaten, especially in the groin area, Mark said flatly. He's in the hospital, but I'd wait a few days before visiting him. Olivia nodded as they descended the stairs. I can't see him right now anyway, she said. I need to find my husband and beg for his forgiveness. It might be difficult, Marks replied. He's probably sailing under the George Washington Bridge as we speak. With that, the detective left the Taylor residence. Detective Marks was only partially correct. By the time she exited the home, David Taylor and Buster were aboard the Amore, sailing past the Statue of Liberty and leaving New York Harbor behind. David steered the boat southeast, putting both the city and his marriage in the past. And so the story ends. Did it unfold as you expected, or were there surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to hit the like button. If you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join us. I bring you engaging stories every day, so click subscribe and turn on the notifications to never miss out. Thanks for reading, and I'll see you next time.